a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang in Beijing. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump held a phone call touching on the Taiwan question on Monday. President Xi Jinping outlined China's principled position, underscoring that Taiwan's return to China is an integral part of the post-World War II international order. President Trump, on the other hand, responded by confirming that the United States, quote-unquote, understands how important the Taiwan question is to China. That is according to the Chinese release. But Reuters, at the same time, is reporting that U.S. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi just held their first phone call since the Japanese PM's remarks sparked a major diplomatic fallout with China over her remarks on Taiwan, following the Chinese and U.S. president's phone call. Now, Beijing has also issued a series of strong and coordinated diplomatic responses over Takaichi's controversial remarks. By the way, Takaichi has so far refused to retract her remarks on Taiwan, with China's Foreign Minister Wang warning that Japan crossed a red line. How seriously has Japan miscalculated China's red lines? And what do these developments mean for regional stability and world order? To help us unpack all these questions, we're joined by Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, by Wang, founding director of the China Institute and McTaggart Research Chair Emeritus at the University of Alberta. He's also an advisor at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. In Beijing, we have Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance. And in our Beijing studio, we have Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Now, Reuters is reporting that U.S. President Donald Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi held a phone call. It is reported to be their first phone call since the Japanese Prime Minister. Her controversial remarks on Taiwan crossing a very important red line, which has sparked firm and solid Chinese diplomatic responses. What may be discussed and how important will all this be? Now, we're joined by Professor Liu here in our Beijing studio. Professor Liu, yes. We don't know the specifics of the Japanese Prime Minister's phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump. What do you think may be discussed or may not be discussed? And how far would Donald Trump push the Japanese Prime Minister to reconsider, if not retract, her very controversial remarks on Taiwan?
Well, I would assume that she was describing a situation where China has been expanding its power and even dominance over the Asian Pacific region, and hence trying to push for the strengthening the presence and even military might of Japan. And although it's very much hypothetical, she is trying to deliver a message to the United States that she is really working for the strategic intent of the United States. But on the other hand, Donald Trump would continue the strategic ambiguity of the U.S. policy. And in the meanwhile, I would guess that the U.S. side would like to see a sort of check and balance between different bigger powers within the Asian Pacific region, and so that they could be alleviated some of the hands to concentrate on more of the domestic issues, particularly the domestic politics that Donald Trump has been facing. So therefore, I wouldn't think there would be a sort of support on either side, but showing understanding and sympathy, also taking some of their own relief over such sort of situation.
Right. Einar, let me ask you about this. Do you think when Donald Trump said that he understands the importance of the Taiwan question to China and the Chinese people, he's largely paying lip service to America's strategic ambiguity, which has been playing out for over 5 decades? How far do you think he would push the Japanese Prime Minister over the Taiwan question?
Well, we've seen Donald Trump in action before. He always puts short-term issues above long-term ones. Now, obviously, he's not going to abandon his push to contain China. But on the other hand, he definitely wants to solve a number of issues domestically, soybeans. He also has rare earth elements. The markets haven't been reacting well. He needs to get some short-term wins. So I can almost guarantee you he was telling her that she needs to back down, make China happy. He also is anticipating a visit in April to China, and that's not going to happen against a backdrop of continued tensions with Taiwan. For her part, she's in a difficult situation. She overplayed her hand. She thought she was being Margaret Thatcherite, strong iron lady, as she likes to put it.
Right. Professor Jiang, now, what do you make of the phone call between the Chinese and American leaders and the subsequent one between the Japanese Prime Minister and Donald Trump?
From the Beijing's official readout, Xi Jinping mentioned Taiwan's importance, not about in the sense of normal positions, but added the post-war international order dimension, and that is actually on the American part remain to be silent. At this point, we have not had a White House readout of the phone call between the two presidents. At the same time, Trump's own true social media posting did not mention Taiwan at all.
Nor did the
He
director
said
of the White House press secretary, mention Taiwan at all when she was asked about whether or not they touched the Taiwan question. I mean, the spokesperson simply ignored that question on the South Lawn of the White House.
Exactly. And then the more mysterious part is about Takaichi Trump call. Is she trying to approach him, or Trump is reaching out to both President Xi and Prime Minister Takaichi in order to settle or calm down? Remember, Trump is the one who likes to play the kingmaker and trying to say, I'm solving another crisis kind of situation. Americans definitely take this seriously, but we should not underestimate the potential American backing of Japan, because American Ambassador George Glass made it very clear in any circumstances, in any dispute between Japan and China, the United States is 100% behind Japan. And he spoke of that on behalf of the president, as he claimed. So therefore, I think we need to pay attention to that angle.
I mean, Professor Liu, doesn't Professor Jiang has a point there? I mean, the United States and Japan are sort of playing good cop, bad cop, having this great synergy against Beijing.
I very much agree, because Japan over the years has been, trying to win the favor of the United States for a number of reasons that they really wanted to stand up above the ashes after the Second World War, given the pressure and containment by the United States and also the global community. And now, seeing Trump is really a short-term leader, so therefore Japan would see such opportunity. I'm doing a favor to deal with the strategy that is being implemented by the United States, and I'm standing up against quote-unquote assertive and even aggressive China. Therefore, she's trying to really get some credit out of the United States. And on the other hand, I also agree with Anna Tangen, is that Trump would really take a pleasure by solving, some of the crises that he may have already feed into certain of the inflammatory pressure within it. So therefore, at the moment, Japan is trying to waggle between the two biggest superpowers across the Pacific, and now even the United States side wouldn't really like to see the further escalation of such sort of situation. But China maintains its consistent and firm ground over this entire issue.
Right. Einar, let me ask you about this. Now, China's responses have been very clear. The Chinese foreign minister, during a tour in Central Asia, urged Japan to correct its remarks rather than, persisting on this wrong path. A message delivered to the audience around the world, rather. At the same time, we've seen 12 Japan-China commercial flights canceled. China suspended imports of Japanese seafood. Talks on resuming Japanese beef exports put on hold. Taken together, how should we understand both the intensity and timing of not just Wang Yi's remarks, but China's response?
China has been extremely firm. This is a dangerous line. I don't know how anybody can miss the point that Taiwan is the brightest of red lines. And at this point, Takaichi, she is playing with fire. She was obviously, and I agree with my two colleagues, she's trying to gain favor with Donald Trump. I wouldn't be surprised after his what happened in Busan, whether he was actually manufacturing this particular crisis by telling her to, put some pressure on them. You mentioned Taiwan, but this is madman politics.
I like the word that you used, manufacture. You can manufacture a lot of things. Chomsky said the American media manufactured consent among the Americans to be against Russia, to be against China. I mean, you think this is a deliberate, it can be a manufactured crisis by the Japanese side on behalf of Washington?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no way that Japan would be going out on its own on such a sensitive issue. I mean, it's not like they don't understand. And it also dovetails with her own personal feelings about, the Japanese war of aggression against China. She wants to downplay it. She's actively said that she wants, no more talk about the Nanjing massacre or the number of people who were killed. She just, wants to kind of put it all away. In fact, she's proposed as part of her government package to take firmer control over the media. This is somebody who supposedly is supposed to be aligned with Western values, but she seems much more intent on putting, authoritarian stamp on the country that she was not elected. Remember, she's not elected to be in that position. It's just inter-party politics that put her there. And quite frankly, with the economic situation coming out as it is, this could literally push Japan into recession. It does not come without costs to China. They had hoped to do something with TPP, also its other trade agreements, and this will endanger that. But at this point, China has no choice. As my colleague said, China has a firm resolve when it comes to issues of principle, and these are not to be toyed with. Now, in terms of Donald Trump, I think Beijing has anticipated that he would be playing these kinds of games, in which is why they're playing this kind of long game. They're trying to make sure that he understands that there are costs to his madman politics. She was reminding him that he needs China to buy these soybeans if these farmers are going to stop committing suicide and going bankrupt. He also needs rare earths as he's going to try to sell all these weapon systems around the world, and I don't think China is going to go along with that. But even with cars in the basic economy, without these rare earths, it comes to a screeching halt. So we're at what I would call a Mexican standoff. Neither side can really push its agenda. You see Trump trying to gain leverage by playing these kind of madman games through proxies. But China continues to remain very resolved. And I think, as they say, keep trying to keep him engaged and at the table, like these promises of having a visit and things like that. These are very much things that Trump really values. And I think that is the deciding factor. It's how he feels on that particular day. And right now, he's probably feeling that he needs to tamp down Japan's aggression and make a best deal he can for himself.
Let me add one point.
Yeah, sure.
That in the aftermath of such a sort of crisis, I think China has really made a remarkable efforts, not only to defend its own interests through all the diplomatic demarques, but also, we have integrated a more of an integrated approach to talk with our neighbors, and also to talk with key stakeholders like the United Nations, the United States, etc. It is there really not only focusing on the domestic core interests, but also to show a sense of responsibility to maintain peace and stability within this entire region, because this is really hard earned after so many people paid their lives to really to be able to maintain such a status quo where the Asian Pacific region turned out to be the engine of the global growth through the peace and development. And this is really something that China is calling on most of the neighbors and other key stakeholders to continue to watch against the some of the negative the forces that is there to disturb such a sort of a mainstream. And this is the point that China's responsibility and also core interest.
Right. Professor Jiang, now in your recent article published on South China Morning Post, you said that Japan's Takaichi should not play with fire. But do you think the global audience, especially those in the West, understands the severity of her remarks and of China's anger and of the very nature of this issue?
Well, I've been following closely on the entire international coverage and comments about this whole episode of Takaichi's remarks on Taiwan. I would have to say that in the beginning, the mainstream press in the West did not pick up this as much. Then with Beijing voicing more protests, taking more measures, they noticed this is something very serious. Therefore, if you look at the headlines in the past week, I've been several weeks, but the past week headlines has heavily tilted towards China's warning towards Japan. Mainstream media put up literally multiple long explainers for their audiences in the West about the history of the two countries' wartime, how sensitive history issues regarding Taiwan, and all of them almost unanimously saying Takaichi overstepped her predecessors in stating what Japan wants to do with Taiwan. And of course, the Chinese punitive measures against Japan, that has been noticed. So that is popular media. I think I would say rather neutral and objective, trying to tell the audience what's going on, is showing concerns, of course. Then the next level is about expert comments. And then things are divided depending on where you sit. For the majority of people who show that Japan is moving right, they look at the history, they look at the gravity of the issue, especially how China sees it. They understand China's reactions, although they think it's very strong. But for those who are against China in a way, quote unquote, trying to contain China with that kind of viewpoint, those analysts tend to think China is playing so-called warrior diplomacy, therefore very aggressive. They want China to toe down. But overall speaking, people are paying attention to this escalating tension. And finally, at the diplomatic official level, we have to say at this point, other than the kind of president's calls between Xi and Trump and Takaichi and Trump now just emerging as we speak during our program, other countries have remained extremely neutral. They have not expressed any particular condemnation on China or on Japan, other than trying to show that things should come down. Otherwise, the regional stability might be at stake. So therefore, the international response is taking this very seriously. They're watching this very closely.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of explaining to do when it comes to why Japan was going from no military to a self-defense force, from a defense to offense, and now from threatening to attack anyone to attacking China over Taiwan. Now, Professor Liu, let me ask you about this. The Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, had several opportunities to retract her remarks, when asked about this question or implied about the issue of this question, but she refused to do so. Given her high popularity rate in Japan, do you think she would issue any comment showing any repentance or regret? How would this, transpire to next?
Even though she did not really retract, she also expressed that she would be more prudent. How that's going to be interpreted over such sort of remark, that really depends on several issues. One is that what will be the continued direct and immediate response from the domestic politics, because certain politicians, even within her own party, are raising the voices against such sort of provocation. And some of the young people also come up with the negative opinion over such. However, there are also the more of the forces that are to strengthen the so-called security preservation, not only for Japan, but also for a more aggressive role for Japan to deal with.
There are lots of those
regional
folks out
issues.
there in the
Right.
Japanese think tank, among the
right.
Japanese youth.
Yeah, and also that it's really very sad that after the celebration of the victory over the Second World War, in which Japan was one of the major culprit, and now some of the younger generations has really ignored the scar that really caused on, or even the Peru caused on the Japan. So therefore, they want really to remove some of the constraint, over their military growth. It also depends on how international community would respond to it. Now that China has submitted the formal letter to the United Nations, United Nations at the moment, I think, is really putting on a procedural archive, and how that's going to be reacted, we're going to see. At the moment, the Japan is far more reliant on China in terms of trade and investment. There are roughly 20% deal with China, and China only depends like 5% to Japan. So therefore, let's see how the tug of war is going if situation will not really be reversed onto the right track. So now, she is still taking the chance to really to continue to feel how the water would run and in which direction, and particularly how would the response from the United States would come out, either in her favor or to negate some of her provocation. So there are a number of issues that need to be watchful and see how that's going to evolve over the next few weeks.
Well, keep an eye on the UN response when permanent representative from China to the United Nations, Ambassador Fu Cong, sent a formal letter to the United Nations. In this very important letter sent by Ambassador Fu to the UN Secretary General Guterres, he referred to Resolution 2758 in the early 1970s. That is a key piece of legislation that some of our folks, friends in the West, may have forgotten. It officially repelled the so-called Republic of China on the Taiwan island, and restored the legitimate seat of People's Republic of China in Beijing to represent the whole of China, the whole of the Chinese people, and rightly so. Professor Jiang, let me ask you about this. What would be a United Nations response to all this?
Well, at the moment, many of the people in the world has a very short memory span. Many people do not have the kind of historical education that China, the two Koreas has regarding their sufferings. Many people don't know what the end of the Second World Settlement is about. So in a sense, the China's letter to the UN is reminding not just the UN, I think the world, about the Second World War settlement that Japan, together with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, these are defeated powers and subject to certain terms. And I think the United Nations would want to see this rather than doing an arbitrary statement of some sort. They would like to see the tension between the two countries settled. I don't think China is making a particular demand for Japan to do something. I think it's a reminder of what the Second World War settlement was all about. And that PR dimension is more important. Of course, it's also a broader escalation strategy to force the Japanese Prime Minister to further consider retracting her remarks. But at the moment that we see, Japan is probably not doing that. They're kind of denying to a certain extent about the UN dimension. I don't think it will go anywhere. The record is clear. But I think they want to step down by de-escalating, saying maybe she overstated, as she privately told her aide. These are leaked stories. And Japanese did have an official explanation to China when they visited that Japan's position on Taiwan has not changed traditionally, and several former prime ministers came out from mainstream background of Liberal Democratic Party of Japan saying she overstated. So these indicated to me probably they're trying to settle to a certain extent that China can accept without a formal retracting in both bilateral terms and multilateral terms at UN, that crisis can be over soon.
Professor Liu, does it remind you of any episode in history?
I think it is time for the, particularly the younger generation, to refresh the history that how Japan has been ruined out of all the economic and technological power due to the wrong direction they have been heading during the Second World War. And now it is important for them to really to remember not to repeat history.
History will not be repeated. That's all the time we have. Professor
right.
Liu, thank you so much, gentlemen, and I'll see you again next time.